When my son said, "You either respect my wife or you leave this house tonight," I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply nodded, folded the newspaper I was reading, and stood up. The silence that followed confused them more than shouting ever could. They expected the old version of me, the man who explained himself, who begged to be understood, who paid to keep peace. That man stayed seated in the chair. The one who stood up was someone else entirely. I walked to the bedroom I had built with my own hands, opened the wardrobe, and pulled out the small travel bag I hadn't used in years. My daughter-in-law smirked, certain she had won. My son looked uncomfortable but said nothing. That was the moment I knew I had already lost him long ago. And that was the moment they unknowingly gave me back my life. The house was quiet except for the ticking wall clock I'd installed after my wife died. Every tick reminded me how much time I had wasted pretending sacrifice was love. I packed slowly, deliberately, choosing only what I needed. Clothes, documents, medication, the old watch my father gave me before he passed. I ignored the framed family photo on the dresser, not because it didn't matter, but because I finally understood it no longer told the truth. From the living room came muffled whispers, my daughter-in-law's sharp tone cutting through my son's weak replies. They were debating whether I would crawl back, whether I would apologize. They didn't know I was already gone in ways that had nothing to do with distance. When I stepped back into the hallway with my bag, they both looked up. My son opened his mouth, hesitated, then closed it again. His wife crossed her arms like a judge waiting for a confession. I walked past them without a word. At the door, I paused, not to look back at them, but to look at the walls. I remembered painting them while my son played with toy cars on the floor, laughing. I remembered promising myself I would always protect him. I kept that promise longer than I should have. I opened the door and stepped out into the cold night air. The drive felt unreal. Streetlights blurred past as memories collided in my head. Tuition fees I paid without complaint. Credit cards I cleared without asking questions. Business failures I rescued him from quietly. I had convinced myself that being needed meant being loved. The small roadside motel appeared like an answer I hadn't known I was asking for. I checked in under my own name, something that felt strangely powerful. The room smelled faintly of detergent and old wood. It was simple, empty, and honest. I placed my bag on the bed and sat down, finally allowing myself to breathe. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment I had ignored my own dignity to protect theirs. By morning, the decision was clear. I wasn't going to confront them. I wasn't going to explain myself. I was going to stop enabling them, quietly, legally, permanently. After breakfast at a nearby cafe, I returned to the motel and opened my laptop. Years of running my own business had taught me the value of records, receipts, and patience. I logged into my accounts one by one. The house they lived in was in my name. The utilities were in my name. Their health insurance was linked to my policy. Their car payments, their phone plans, even their internet bill traced back to me like invisible strings. I had tied those knots myself, believing it made me a good father. Now I began untying them with the same calm hands. The first call was to the bank. I canceled the automatic transfers. The second call was to the insurance provider. I removed their names. The third was to the phone company. Authorized users removed. Each confirmation email felt like another breath of clean air entering my lungs. There was no anger in me, only clarity. I wasn't taking revenge. I was taking responsibility back. By afternoon, my phone buzzed for the first time. One missed call, then another, then 3 more. I didn't answer. I already knew the conversation they wanted to have. Confusion would come first, then irritation, then panic. I had lived long enough to recognize patterns. I turned my phone face down and went for a walk. The town was unfamiliar but peaceful. People passed me without knowing who I was or what I had lost, and that anonymity felt like freedom. I sat on a bench in a small park and watched a father teach his young son how to ride a bicycle. The boy fell, scraped his knee, and looked up. The father didn't yell. He didn't blame. He knelt, cleaned the wound, and helped him stand again. I realized then that love was never meant to look like obedience. I smiled to myself, not bitterly but knowingly. That evening the calls intensified. Voicemails piled up. My son's voice shifted from annoyed to strained. My daughter-in-law's voice followed, sharp at first, then cracking around the edges. I listened to none of them. Instead, I opened a new folder on my laptop and began organizing documents I had neglected for years. Property deeds, business contracts, wills, beneficiaries. I updated everything, methodically, carefully, not to punish but to protect myself from ever being cornered again. 2 days later, they showed up. I heard the knock before I saw them through the peephole. My son stood stiffly, eyes sunken. His wife stood beside him, arms tight against her sides, confidence replaced by calculation. I waited a full 10 seconds before opening the door, not out of cruelty, but to remind myself that I no longer reacted on command. "We need to talk," my son said, skipping pleasantries. "I know," I replied calmly. "That's why I didn't answer the phone." They stepped inside without being invited. I didn't stop them. I sat on the chair across from the bed while they remained standing, unsure of their footing for the first time in years. "What you're doing is unfair," his wife said, breaking the silence. "You can't just cut us off." "I didn't cut you off," I said. "I stopped paying for things that were never my responsibility." My son finally looked at me. "Dad, we're behind on everything. The bank called, the insurance." "You told me to leave," I interrupted gently. "So I did. You wanted independence. This is what it looks like." "That's not what we meant," he said weakly. "But it's what you said." Silence filled the room again. I could see the calculation behind their eyes, searching for leverage, for guilt, for the version of me that used to bend. They didn't find him. "We just need time," my son said. "Help us for a few more months." I stood up. "No." The word surprised even me with its firmness. "I raised you to stand on your own," I continued. "Somewhere along the way, I forgot to do the same." His wife scoffed. "So that's it, you're abandoning us." I met her gaze steadily. "No, I'm finally not abandoning myself." They left shortly after, anger replacing desperation when pleading failed. I locked the door behind them and sat back down, hands steady, heart calm. Outside, their car engine roared to life, then faded into the distance. That night, I slept better than I had in years. What they didn't know was that this was only the beginning, not of revenge but of consequences, and consequences, unlike anger, have patience. The morning after they left, I woke before sunrise, not from worry but from habit. For years, my body had been trained to rise early to solve other people's problems. This time when my eyes opened, there was no knot in my chest, no sense of urgency, just quiet. I brewed coffee in the motel's small machine and sat by the window, watching the sky change colors. Somewhere between the gray and the gold, I realized something important. Peace doesn't arrive with noise. It arrives when noise finally leaves. By noon, the first official notice landed in my email. A payment reversal confirmation from the bank, then another from the insurance company. Each message was precise, emotionless, and final. Systems don't argue. Systems don't feel guilty. They simply execute instructions. I had spent my whole life building systems for others. Now I was watching them work for me. Around mid-afternoon, my phone rang again. This time I answered, not because I felt obligated, but because I was ready. "Dad," my son said immediately, his voice tight, "please don't hang up." "I'm listening," I replied. "We didn't know things were this bad," he said quickly. "The bills, the debt, the calls, it all just hit at once." "It didn't hit at once," I said calmly. "It piled up while you weren't looking." Silence, then a sigh. "Can we meet?" he asked, "just you and me?" I considered it for a moment, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to see something for myself. "Tomorrow morning," I said, "public place." He agreed instantly. That night I pulled out the folder I had created and added more documents. A full financial timeline, every transfer, every payment, every bailout. When I reached the section labeled personal loans, my stomach tightened. not because of the amount but because of the dates. Several withdrawals had been made without my direct approval, small enough not to raise alarms, frequent enough to add up. I stared at the numbers, recognizing a pattern I had seen before in clients who hid addictions behind excuses. The next morning I arrived early at the cafe we agreed on. I chose a table near the window. When my son walked in, he looked older, not wiser, just worn. He sat down across from me, hands clasped tightly. "She didn't want me to come alone," he said. "That's why you needed to," I replied. He nodded slowly. "I didn't know about the loans," he said after a moment. "The cash advances, the missed payments." "Did you know about the gambling?" I asked. His head snapped up. "What?" I watched his face carefully. Shock, confusion, then realization. "You didn't know," I said. He swallowed hard. "She said it was investments, online stuff I didn't ask." "That's the problem," I said. "You stopped asking a long time ago." He rubbed his temples. "Dad, she's in deep. People are calling, not banks, other people." There it was, the truth finally stepping into the light. "Did she use my name?" I asked. He hesitated. "Did she use my name?" I repeated. "Yes," he admitted quietly. "She said you'd understand, that you always helped." The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were accurate. I had trained them to believe my limits didn't exist. "I need to know something," I said. "Did you ever stop her?" He didn't answer. That was answer enough. I paid for the coffee and stood. "I won't be part of this," I said. "Not financially, not legally, not emotionally." "She's my wife," he said desperately. "What am I supposed to do?" "That," I replied, "is the first adult question you've asked in years." I left him there, staring into a cup he hadn't touched. That afternoon I visited an old colleague who now worked in legal compliance. I didn't accuse. I didn't dramatize. I simply asked questions and showed documents. He confirmed what I already suspected. If my name had been used without consent, that wasn't family conflict. That was fraud. And if debts had been incurred under false pretenses, distance was no longer just emotional. It was necessary. Within days, the pressure escalated. Unknown numbers began calling me. Messages arrived that weren't polite, weren't subtle. I didn't respond. I forwarded everything to my lawyer. Boundaries are strongest when enforced by paper and law, not words. Then came the night knock. It was late, too late for apologies. When I opened the door, my daughter-in-law stood alone. No makeup, no arrogance, just fear poorly disguised as anger. "You ruined everything," she said. "No," I replied. "I stopped fixing what I didn't break." "You think you're better than us," she snapped. "I think I'm done being used." She laughed bitterly. "You don't even know half of it." "I know enough," I said. She stepped closer. "If you don't help, people get hurt." I met her gaze steadily. "Threats won't work." "They're not threats," she whispered. "They're facts." "Then you should call the police," I said, "or a lawyer, or take responsibility." Her face twisted. For a moment, I thought she might scream. Instead, she turned and walked away, heels echoing against the pavement like punctuation marks ending a sentence. The next morning, I filed a formal statement, not against her out of spite, but out of self-preservation. Love doesn't require self-destruction. Family doesn't demand silence in the face of wrongdoing. Weeks passed, the calls stopped, then the messages, then the noise. One evening, my son showed up again, alone. This time, he didn't ask to come in. He stood at the door like a guest, not an owner. "I left," he said. I studied him, really studied him. "Why?" "Because I finally understood something," he said. "You weren't controlling me. You were carrying me." I stepped aside and let him in. We sat across from each other in silence. Not hostile, not tense, just real. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "I just wanted you to know I'm trying." I nodded. Trying is where accountability begins. As he left, I realized something else. Justice isn't loud, growth isn't dramatic, and revenge isn't necessary when truth does the work for you. They had told me to leave. I did. And in doing so, I took back everything that mattered. I slept that night on a thin mattress in a rented room above a closed grocery shop, the kind of place where the walls remember more secrets than the people living inside them. The fan creaked like it was arguing with the ceiling, and sleep came in broken pieces, but my mind was calm. That was new. For the first time since I walked out of my daughter's house, I wasn't replaying her words. I wasn't hearing her husband's voice either. I was planning. Quietly, carefully, patient men live longer. And patient men win. At dawn, I washed my face at a rusted tap, put on my cleanest shirt, and stepped outside like a man who had already decided the ending of his own story. The city was waking up, vendors shouting prices, buses coughing black smoke, people rushing as if life was chasing them. I walked slowly. I had spent 40 years building things, businesses, relationships, a reputation. I knew how systems worked, how money moved, how fear hid behind confidence. My son-in-law thought he had won because he had the house, the authority, and my daughter's obedience. What he didn't understand was that I had built everything on paper long before I built it with bricks. Ownership, signatures, witnesses, these were weapons sharper than knives, and every weapon I needed was already in my name. By noon, I was sitting across from my lawyer, an old friend who had aged like iron, less shiny, more solid. He didn't ask me why I had returned after so many years of silence. He simply listened. When I finished, he leaned back, adjusted his glasses, and smiled the way surgeons smile before difficult operations. He told me what I already knew. The house was still legally mine. I had allowed them to live there. I had never transferred ownership. The businesses funding my daughter's lifestyle were trusts I controlled. Her husband had power only because I had allowed him to feel powerful. The law, unlike emotions, does not care about shouting. The next step was silence. I did not call my daughter. I did not confront her husband. I disappeared. Silence unsettles arrogant people. They need reactions the way fire needs oxygen. Instead, I changed my phone number, shifted my money, froze accounts they didn't even know were connected to me. Bills stopped getting paid. Credit cards declined. The house staff began asking questions. The silence started to scream. And still I waited. Because panic makes people careless, and careless people reveal everything. 3 weeks later, my phone rang on a new number only 2 people had. My daughter's voice was thin, trembling, stripped of the authority she had borrowed from her husband. She asked where I was. She asked why the accounts weren't working. She asked if something was wrong. I let the silence sit between us long enough for her to feel the weight of it. Then I told her I was fine. I told her I had simply stopped paying for things that were no longer my responsibility. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse. Calm words cut deeper when guilt is already bleeding inside. Her husband took the phone. His tone was polite at first, fake respect dripping from every word. He spoke about misunderstandings, about family, about elders deserving care. I listened. When he finished, I asked him one question. "Do you know whose house you're living in?" He laughed. People laugh when they're afraid but don't want to admit it. I told him to check the documents. I ended the call. That night he didn't sleep. I know because men like him never do once doubt enters their mind.